America cannot tell the truth about herself. If the history of this country were written, you would have to say that this country is a nation of thieves.
I'm an African American with Cherokee heritage. My great-grandmother, Phyllis Thompson Pettit, was a slave of the Cherokees.
They took so much time and effort to bury the truth about who we are. They just wanted us to be slaves from Africa.
Today, you will hear from an angry Haitian woman disrespecting the lineage and history of foundational Black American freedmen as she finds out the truth. Check it out.
Not y'all lying on your DNA results. And it's crazy because y'all say DNA is fake, but then when you got something you think you can use to change your history, now all of a sudden you want to believe DNA. This is not your origins. This is your journey. And the only thing the journey does on Ancestry is just tells you where your ancestors lived in the recent past. This does not mean my origins started in America. This is my mom, says Haiti. This is my dad, United States. These are my DNA results. You see how they say Africa? Okay. Stop coming on this app and lying and spreading false information. African Americans / Black Americans, whatever you want to go by, we're not from America. Our origins started in Africa. That's it.
First manipulation. Non-indigenous pale-skinned immigrants from Italy, Germany, Siberia, and Asia were showing up in the U.S. Census records being labeled as Native American. Why? Because the U.S. government needed to manufacture a paper trail for the narrative that they was trying to create. These people had no ancestral ties to the Americas, but were being inserted into the identity. You gotta ask yourself, why does this all seem so coordinated? Because if you really think about it, most Native Americans can't even trace back their own paper trail past the 1890s, usually stopping at or after the Dole rolls. Now pay attention to this timeline. The U.S. purchases Alaska in 1867. Then in 1887, the U.S. rolls out the Dole Rolls Act. And remember, this act is their version that determines who's officially Indian or not. Coincidence? Or calculated rollout? Because remember, the official story is that the Native Americans migrated from Siberia through the Bering Strait straight into Alaska. Also, later on, Russia was also colonizing Alaska. And here's where things get even more interesting. Those Alaskan natives were being enslaved by the Russian government. Russia laid claim to Alaska beginning in the 1770s, mainly occupying the coastal areas with a primary interest in exploiting of furs. The Yungan, or Aleut, I hope I pronounced that right, people were the first Alaskan natives to be impacted by being forced into slavery. And remember, after the U.S. buys Alaska from Russia, Siberian / Asiatic people started showing up in the U.S. Census records being labeled as Native American. Mind you, Siberians, Alaskan natives, Native Americans. I'm just saying. It almost seems like the Siberian and Russian natives came with the Alaska Purchase. This was the first game piece, allegedly. And as I mentioned before, when those explorers got over here and were describing seeing copper-colored, brown-skinned, woolly-haired people, or when they were relabeling the natives to Negro or Black, they weren't talking about these guys. They were talking about these guys. Second manipulation. Melanated Europeans were being labeled as Negro and Black on the census. And remember, these weren't the descendants of African slaves. They were melanated Scots and melanated Irish, or even Moorish remnants, or even indigenous melanated people of that continent before colonial rewriting. Third, and I think this was the final manipulation out of the 5 that I've seen while doing my research on the United States Census records. African-born immigrants started arriving to the United States in the early 1900s, being assigned Americanized names, absorbing more into our identity. Why wasn't their names kept documented or respected? They'll say things like to avoid social or economic assimilation or to avoid discrimination for better job opportunities. But but really they were folding them into the already black indigenous population that already existed here. Once you erase the name, you erase the nation it came from. And no shade, no tea, but when they got over here, they shedded their names for convenience, while ours were taken by force. One group came to adapt, the other had to survive. And this is what we mean when we say delineation. Because most of y'all never lived the Black American experience, but then y'all come over here and try to tell us about the Black American experience. Your ancestors' experiences living in America and my ancestors' experiences living in America are two different experiences. Just so you know. But anyway, blend the identity, blur the lines, and then bury the truth. That is the exact definition of erasure. What's our saying? Each one teach one. Because when I say I'm not letting my foot up off this gas and y'all next, y'all not gonna have no other choice but to accept the truth.
It's living in this country has been difficult. You know what I mean? Just being the originals. We've been through so much. We've been reclassified so much, but we know who we are. You know, I talked to my uncle the other day. He was like, "Actually, Audrey, granddaddy is Blackfoot. My daddy said we Cherokee. So I have a mixture of Blackfoot Cherokee." But when you go out the door and the whole world is calling you something else, it creates a lot of confusion. You know what I mean? Your government is telling you something else. It created a lot of confusion. But we always knew who we were. We're not generic Africans, okay? Even though we've welcomed you Africans. We've claimed African DNA. We say we got some of that in us. Very little, but we got some in there. You know, honestly, I don't know if I got African DNA. You know what I mean? Because my parents made it with the Cherokees and the Blackfoots. Now, you can say Indians are Africans. Maybe. You know what I mean? I don't know. But there was a heifer, okay, that said, the pretendians, all this pretendian stuff, you know what I'm saying? Because we just some fake Indians or whatever. The pretendians. She said, y'all claiming a country that don't even want y'all. The stupidity. She think we claiming India. Like, wait a minute. God damn it. You know what I'm saying? Y'all Africans need to be quiet. You guys are embarrassing yourselves. You're not embarrassing us. Because we ain't y'all. Okay? Maybe there was some African that like I said, we know Africans migrated here. Okay? But there were people here. We have to always break this down to y'all. Y'all actually think that there was no black people on this land. That's how we know y'all ain't got no education over there. You know what I'm saying? Because y'all really think that Christopher Columbus brought all the black people over here. Whatever. Keep talking. You know what I'm saying? Just keep talking. You know what I mean? You show yourselves. But we tried to tell y'all that we were the originals of this land. Now we finally have the Cherokee Nation finally coming out and saying, we are the Aboriginals. Well, they ain't say it exactly like that, but they know what they did. But like I said, people don't believe that the darker people are the originals, not the people with the straight hair. But it's fine, whatever. You know what I mean? We knew all along. We don't need your recognition. I do want my money, though. So I may still apply for citizenship. Just because I know I got family on it. I know I can prove mine. But the truth comes out. The truth always comes out, whether you like it or not. And I think some of y'all Africans hate that we can take claim to this land and we can take claim to yours if we wanted to. You know what I'm saying? But we are different people, that's for sure. And we damn sure ain't Africans no more. We foundational Black Americans. We are the aboriginals of this land.
They're warriors. From the very beginning, Black Americans have been a vital part of the American story, helping to make this the greatest nation in the history of the world.
Let's continue to correct the propaganda and the attempt at erasing the truth. Black Americans are not the descendants of the Indians in the history books. They are the Indians. The proof has been buried, but it's not gone. When Christopher Columbus washed up on these shores, lost and delirious, who did he write that he found? He called them Indios. He mapped a land he labeled India Superior, a territory that included Florida. He wasn't hallucinating an empty land. He was documenting people who were already there. These images can be found in Gran Canaria, Spain, at the Columbus Museum, Casa de Colón. And who were those people? They weren't the pale-skinned Siberians who crossed a land bridge, that's for sure. The historical records, the artwork from the era, the very descriptions, they detail people with dark skin, with hair textures that Europeans had never seen. They describe the original people as dark-skinned and woolly haired, the true owners of the soil. The people that Columbus met were Black Americans, the West Indians of the Caribbean, the Indians of the North and South American coasts. All of these territories were Black civilizations. Native Americans are the erasure. They are the last part of the destiny swap, a foreign invasive group from Siberia, and was grafted onto the identity of the people who were already here, while the original people were systematically reclassified, enslaved, and renamed to sever their claim to the land. The Indian Removal Act was a removal of Black indigenous nations. The face on the old nickel, the buffalo nickel, that proud profile was a Black indigenous man, an American Indian. Every time someone speaks about Native American history while pointing to a group that arrived later, they are perpetuating the final stage of the conquest, the theft of the victim's identity. They replace the people and the story. Black Americans are not a people without a land. They are the land. They are India Superior. They are the Indians that Columbus couldn't miss, and that every power since has tried to make you unsee. The map doesn't lie. The history books do.
They took so much time and effort to bury the truth about who we are. They just wanted us to be slaves from Africa, to have no identity, to have no roots. And they went to great lengths to cover up our identities. So they are controlling the vital statistics and what it looks like and who is on the census and how you are represented on the census. Oh, you're light-skinned or you're this, that, or the other. That was introduced to us by colonizers. So let's stop pushing forward that narrative and remember who we are. We are the people of this land. We honor the land. We honor our ancestors. We honor the truth. So let's, share our truths. If your truth is different than mine, it doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right, or I'm right and you're wrong. It just means this is what I found.
Did you know one of the biggest clues about who the so-called African Americans really are is all in the language? Let me explain. When Europeans first arrived in places like Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, they noticed something they couldn't explain, and something they later tried to hide. The dark-skinned people they wanted to label as Negro, mulatto, or colored, they already spoke native languages fluently. Algonquian, Powhatan, Arawak, even regional trade dialects. So tell me, how does someone fresh off a ship suddenly speak the exact indigenous tongue of the land that they supposedly just arrived in? They don't. That doesn't make sense. Because these were not outsiders. They were the original people of the land, American Indians. Colonial governors actually complained that many of the people they tried to classify as Negro were speaking native languages in court.
And you can tell them from the way that their eyes were, right? Look at those eyes. As you can see, this man has a tan. This not even his fucking real color. I'm about to show you the Imperium boat that brought these people over here and helped the European Imperium boat. That's just one group. Let's go to the Cambodians. Native Americans today. Let's go to the Cambodians. And you better know it.
Y'all gonna tell it.
You better fuck. Yeah, they gave them our land intentionally.
All this was intentional.
You can't forget about the Eskimos. We need our history to be told. All of them are fucking immigrants. They're not fucking Native Americans at all. So they sent their ass to America. I thought Atlantis didn't exist. Atlantis Insula. Yeah, tell them again, Corcus Mountain, baby. That's why the planet had to be cooled down for them to even live.
When most people hear Native American, they imagine red skin and feathers. When they hear Black American, they think Africa and slavery. The reality is that Native Black American Indians have always been part of this land. Early European maps and journals described Black Indians up and down the Atlantic coast, tribes with dark skin, curly or woolly hair, living in organized nations before Europeans ever set foot here. In fact, many southeastern tribes, the Yamasee, Washita, Catawba, and even branches of the Cherokee, were described as Black. Some even fought against colonists in the 1500s and 1600s, long before slavery became the main narrative. One erased truth is land ownership. Native Black American Indians held territory across the South, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi. The Washita Nation, recognized in old French and Spanish treaties, were Black indigenous people who lived along the Mississippi River Valley. They farmed, fished, built towns, and traded with Africa and the Caribbean before colonization. That history has been buried because it doesn't fit the slaves-only storyline. Another truth, the Seminole Nation. The Seminole people in Florida were never a single tribe. They were a union of native groups and free Black people who escaped slavery. Together, they built one of the strongest resistance movements against the U.S. government. The Seminole Wars in the 1800s were so fierce that America spent more money fighting them than almost any other conflict of that era. Black Seminoles weren't runaway slaves. They were free people, defending their homeland alongside native allies. But colonization did what it always does. It divided. Through the Dawes Act and the Indian Removal Act, many native Black people were forced into false categories. Colored on one hand, Indian on the other. This stripped generations of their native identity, erasing their role as original people of Turtle Island. Yet, the truth still breathes. Oral traditions, old census records, and family stories remind us that Native Black Americans were not outsiders. They were the builders, warriors, and keepers of this land. From the Yamasee in South Carolina, to the Washita in Louisiana, to the Black Seminoles who crossed into Mexico, their presence is undeniable. For far too long, the mainstream narrative around Black Americans has been one-dimensional. Enslaved Africans brought to the Americas. While that chapter is real and painful, it is not the full story. What's often ignored or deliberately erased is the deep, complex, and ancient history of Black people in the Americas long before 1619 and even before Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean in 1492. Across the globe, every ethnic group, from the Irish to the Chinese to the Aztecs, has a recognized origin story. People study and celebrate where they came from. But when it comes to Black Americans, the conversation too often begins and ends with slavery. That's no accident. It's a systemic form of historical erasure. But history, oral traditions, archaeology, and even admissions by modern tribal nations are proving otherwise. The term Turtle Island comes from indigenous creation stories across North America, especially from Iroquois and Algonquian-speaking peoples. But what many don't know is that some of the earliest descriptions of the inhabitants of the Americas speak of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, people that closely resemble what we today call Black people. From Olmec stoneheads in Mexico, clearly bearing African features, to accounts by early Spanish explorers describing dark-skinned tribes in Florida and along the Mississippi River, the evidence keeps stacking. These aren't theories. They're artifacts, records, and testimonies. Ancient Black nations and tribes lived in what is now North America long before Europeans and enslaved Africans arrived. These indigenous Black Americans were here, rooted in the soil of Turtle Island, practicing their cultures, languages, and trade. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the U.S. government began issuing the Dawes Rolls. These were official lists meant to determine tribal membership in native nations, especially among the so-called 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Muskogee, and Seminole. Here's the catch. Many black native people who had lived with these tribes for generations, often intermarried, shared culture, and even fought in wars together, were excluded or placed on separate freedmen rolls. The Dawes Rolls labeled them not as tribal members, but simply as freedmen, which stripped them of their rights, land claims, and full citizenship within the tribe. This government-sponsored separation rewrote identity and legally erased native black people from the official story. It was strategic, aimed at limiting land claims and consolidating tribal power in the hands of a few, especially after the Civil War and the ending of slavery in Indian Territory. After over a century of denial, the Cherokee Nation officially recognized black freedmen descendants as full citizens. This wasn't just a legal decision, it was a validation of generations of oral history, genealogical records, and DNA evidence proving that black people were part of the tribe, not just as slaves, but as kin. This change didn't come easily. It followed decades of legal battles, activism, and pushback from within the tribe. But it opened the door to re-examining other tribes' roles in the enslavement of black people, a part of history many native nations are still hesitant to confront. The uncomfortable truth is that some native tribes were complicit in chattel slavery, owning enslaved black people, and aligning with the Confederacy during the Civil War. That's a part of the past that complicates the narrative of shared oppression, but it must be told. It doesn't erase the suffering native people endured under U.S. colonization, but it does highlight the layered, interconnected, and sometimes painful truth of how native and black histories intersect, not always as allies, but sometimes as oppressors and the oppressed. Now, the acknowledgement by the Cherokee Nation is empowering a movement of native black freedmen, descendants of those original black tribal members who are reclaiming their rightful place in America's story. These individuals and families are restoring their languages, reconnecting to their cultural roots, and challenging the forced identity boxes of just African American or just freedmen. And where are all the naysayers now? The ones who said black Americans were just descendants of slaves with no ties to the land, no roots here beyond chains and cotton fields? They're silent. Because the truth is louder than lies. The narrative is shifting. Scholars, archaeologists, and even tribal elders are revisiting what they were taught. The presence of black people in the Americas is not a recent accident. It is an ancient, foundational truth. Black people have always been here, and now the world is being forced to remember. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.